Hey YouTube, welcome back. This is part 3 on my little custom diorama series. If you haven't seen the first two parts, feel free to check them out. But the big thing with this episode, as you can see here, is vegetation and preserving living vegetation. All of these leaves I collected while they were still alive. They were bright green. It was about 4 years ago. But despite that, you can tell that with this preservation method, they're still very pliable, almost plastic in nature. They've kind of got a waxy feel. Yeah, I've been running these leaves through the leaf punch for the last 4 years, and I still got a few solid ones, but I'm going to go ahead and walk you guys through the process and make some from scratch here using some smaller stuff that I can use the whole leaf in scale, so to speak. So I've got a couple patches in the backyard that are more weeds than grass, which is unfortunate, but I guess also fortunate for you guys. So I'm gonna go ahead and pluck up some stuff that I think might look good in scale with this little jungle base that I've been working on in part 1 and part 2. This bigger leaf you can also use for the leaf punch, for example, but you always want to have a buddy out there with you when you're picking stuff in the wild, right, Simba? So you're going to use pure glycerin. You can find this at the drugstores. I got this at CVS. It's basically a moisturizer for skin. You can also sometimes see it in the first aid section. Add those 2 parts of water you just saw, and then the 1 part glycerin for a 2-to-1 ratio. Mix it up pretty well because that glycerin it's pretty thick. You're going to really want to mix it around in there. And then when you go to add in your living vegetation, make sure that you don't just throw a whole clump in there. You could, but then you wind up preserving a bunch of junk that you're not going to actually wind up using. So you can fit more in there if you just grab the leaves. You can definitely put some root material in there. I use the root material just as a way to kind of keep everything underwater, because you're going to want to put it in there for at least 2 days and then up to 6 days. I just go ahead and do it for 6 days because I usually have other things going on. I'm not really in a rush with the hobby, so I can just go ahead and let it soak in there for a week. And in the meantime, let me go ahead and show you some AK Interactive laser cut foliage. This is another good option. Not really DIY, but at the same time, it's not super expensive if you can find a good distributor. And they offer you a pretty cool guide where it shows you how to use the watercolor pencils to get a really nice, almost like a modeled, kind of random, patchy. It looks realistic, but yeah, you just go in with that watercolor pencil, add the water, brush it on, move it all around. It kind of dries a little lighter than it looks when it's wet, obviously, but it's nice and random. So you can see there with another pass with the pencil, another pass with the water, just go back and forth until it looks right. And then I've got some other examples sitting around on that same sheet that I've more or less considered finished at this point. And then once it's already off the sheet and on the base, you can always come back into with I prefer acrylic paint just because again it's going to soak into that paper and it's dries quick and you can see the results pretty fast. And really the best advice I can give for painting is to just build everything up in small layers. You don't want to try to do it all at once. It's just going to dry too thick. You're going to get brush strokes. It's not going to blend very well. Anyway, cutting it out, it's very straightforward. Just go right through the tabs, and then once you've got the leaf by itself, you can go ahead and give it a bit of a fold or a bend or something to make it look a little more three-dimensional, just because most leaves and plants in general often have some kind of a curve to them. And then a big benefit of having all the different brush and root material is giving you something to plant that leaf in without having to necessarily drill a hole and put in some glue and hold it until it dries, which can take some time. So you can see it there. It's really just being supported mostly by the root material itself. All right, let's open this up and take a look at it. It's been 6 days of soaking here in the glycerin water mix, and I'm going to go ahead and pull out this root material, let everything dry. Even if that root material wasn't all submerged, I'm really not too concerned with it. I've got so much preserved root material at this point that it's probably going to outlast me. But here it is all dried. You can see that not all of the leaves really stayed flat, of course. They were just kind of smashed in there. So not to worry, we'll paint them up and get them flattened out. Here's a cool example of one that you can see like it started out green and alive, and now this is after 6 days. It's definitely started to die off and lose its color and turn brown, but we can use this as a reference because we're going to be painting all these anyway. And so if you have some damaged leaves, you can definitely take inspiration from the real world in terms of how you add some different yellows and browns. And here you just see me taping them down before I paint them, just to make sure that they do sit flat. Once they're painted, I'm going to go ahead and put a pretty thick coat of high gloss acrylic gel medium over it, and I think that's really going to be the trick to get them to stay flat and not curl up and fold back to the way that they were all crushed in when they were soaking in the glycerin. But pretty straightforward, just airbrushing some Tamiya green mix, probably a little bit of a dark green, NATO green. So once this dries and then you go over with that gloss gel medium, the acrylic medium, then you can go ahead and either run it through the leaf punch set, if it's like that bigger leaf there at the bottom, for example, or if you want to continue with the painting, I recommend just brush painting with acrylics, same concept as you would do with the laser cut foliage. There's the example of the leaf punch. There's a few different companies now that make these. I imagine they all work the same. So it's really just up to price and availability in terms of which one you want. But here's some AK 3rd Gen paints. Again, you don't need AK 3rd Gen paints. You can probably use any old acrylic paint, including that Liquitex, more of a really thick, maybe artist paint that you'd expect to see on a canvas. It's definitely not something that's thinned down, so you'd have to thin it way down. But yeah, any kind of craft paint will work fine as long as you're thinning it and it's the right color you want. Then there's no issue with it. You certainly don't need a certain brand over another. And when it comes to thinning, I'm just using tap water. I'm just layering in a lot of different green tones here. I start with the darkest color first and then get progressively lighter and lighter and lighter. And as I get lighter and lighter and lighter, I'm covering less and less of the leaf. So you wind up with just a few little really bright kind of lime green highlights, and then that original dark base tone is still going to show through. And yeah, you can see it's almost like I'm trying to pick out the individual little, I guess you'd almost call them veins that run through the leaves. But because you're using a real leaf, you've got some real texture on there too. So even if you want to go ahead and just dry brush it really quick, it's going to pop out some of the real texture on that leaf, and you'll get some pretty good realistic results, especially if it's not something that's the focal point. If it's just a background leaf on a larger display base, then hopefully no one's going to spend their time judging just that leaf and kind of get the idea across. Here's you can see maybe a couple little pieces of natural damage that's occurred on that leaf, so I'm just going through with this brown paint. Again, darkest color first, and I'm just going to go ahead and outline everything that's dead on this little guy with the brown paint. And then I'll go ahead and start mixing in the lighter tan colors, more of like an ivory white. Start mixing in that with the brown to get more of the tan that you can see in that reference photo I showed earlier. And then I'll start mixing in that yellow with the green, get a really nice kind of yellow lime green, and add that too, because as the green color fades out of the leaf, it fades to really a yellowish color before it starts getting into the dead tans and browns. At least with these leaves that I'm trying to represent, certainly not something that is true across all leaves. I mean, some turn orange, some turn red, some stay yellow. They never go brown. So it really just depends on exactly what kind of leaf you're trying to do. But I'm just coming in kind of stippling in with the white or off-white tan color that I've mixed in with the brown. And depending on how dead the leaf is, I mean, it could be, as you saw in that picture, the whole leaf could start turning this color, or it could just be a little section. Maybe a majority of the leaf is still alive, and a couple insects have gotten into one spot and they've killed off a little spot. So you might have a few little dots stippled on in some spots, but the majority of the leaf is still going to be green. And then there you see I've mixed in kind of that yellow lime color just to add that tone to the rest of the leaf. Here you can see it may be a better example because this is just a bigger leaf in general. I've gone from the darkest shadow part of the leaf there at the heart of it, and it fades out as you get farther away into a lime green with the yellow near the damaged sections, which are brown with that kind of off-white highlight. And then what I can show you here is just that sometimes it's easier to paint these while they're actually on the base, because that way they're kind of sitting in their final spot, you can see how the light hits them. You can see what spots are going to be in shadow. You can see what spots are going to be in highlight, and then you can also treat the colors accordingly. But what I'm actually doing here is using a green tone to kind of paint in almost like a moss or something, like a kind of like a pond scum kind of slime that's over the rocks or over certain parts of the dirt. Whatever's going to be in really deep shadow, whatever's going to be kind of retaining a lot of that humidity and moisture that might be on a jungle floor. And this will just lay the groundwork. I've got some really fine flocking material that can give some moss texture. I'll come in here with the clear glue, not really white glue, but it's the same thing. And then you just, again, like we did in part 2, add that in wherever you want to add some additional leaves or moss. And unlike the previous video where I wound up airbrushing a lot of dust tones over all the leaves, what I'm going to do is come in with this dust colored paint and then just individually pick out a couple of the leaves that I add in here that are just a little too bright, but most of them are going to retain their original dead leaf color. So this is that final layer of dead leaf vegetation. So we've gone from stuff that at this point is probably closer to the true ground color, and then we've got kind of a faded dusty leaf with a ground color mix, and now we've got the final layer of leaves. And then here it is. This is where we're at. Even though we've started building up layers of vegetation off the ground floor there, we are probably still going to need maybe a tree or some tall man-sized palm fronds, something like that, to really give a good backdrop for this figure that I've started here. Classic dragon, 135 scale Navy SEAL. But we don't want the figure to be the tallest thing on the base. We want to give him a good backdrop, so it really looks like he's deep within the jungle, and he's not silhouetting himself on top of some hillside, because while we want to bring attention to the figure, we also want to keep it realistic and really make it look like they're really in the thick of it. I don't know that I'm going to have a figure painting tutorial in the future, maybe something like how to paint realistic face paint or something like that on a camouflage figure. But if you really want to learn how to paint a figure, there's definitely better tutorials out there by more talented people than myself. Anyway, thanks for checking this out. Thanks for being a subscriber if you are, and I do appreciate it. I'm coming up on a year on YouTube now, so it's pretty awesome.